Okay, and then Debbie, just whenever you're ready, you can start. Debi Nixon's with the Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City. So Debbie, you can tell them a little bit more about yourself and then dive right in.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Again, I really hope that you've had a fabulous day as you've been together, just really focusing on putting your house in order. I'm sorry that I'm not there with you all. As Christine said, I'm Debi Nixon. I serve on the staff at Church of the Resurrection. We're a United Methodist Church in the Kansas City area. Our church just celebrated this past weekend our 34th anniversary, our 34th birthday. We were founded by Senior Pastor Adam Hamilton. And what has happened here has been something that we never expected or dreamed could possibly happen, because we are now a congregation that has 8 physical locations here, all in the Kansas City area. We have 4 in Kansas, and we have 4 in Missouri, with also a growing online congregation. And the only reason I start with that is because I just want us to recognize, first of all, the power of connection. And I want to tell you how humbling it is for us to be in ministry with each one of you as a part of the Great Plains Annual Conference, as well as our connection as United Methodist. But also to say, man, we never know what God is going to do, and it's been quite a journey as we do this together. And so I've served on the staff here now for 34 or 30 of our 34 years. And so as you can imagine, at that time, I've had almost every job here. In the last 5 years, I was asked to transition to become the executive director of donor relations here, as well as overseeing the Resurrection Foundation, which is our ministry to help those who are wanting to remember the church in their gift planning so that they can be of God's continued work for generations to come. So that's the role I currently have. And I got to tell you, to be very honest, when they asked me to move into this position 5 years ago, I was extremely anxious. I do not see myself as a fundraiser. I actually have money anxiety, so you should know that about me. And I'm like, I don't know if I can actually do this ministry or do well in it, because I'm not certain that I could actually sit down and ask somebody for money. And so I needed some center points for what I would be doing that would help me determine if this was God's calling on my life. And so here's what I began to anchor myself in, is that I remembered that the gifts that our donors provide, that each one of you provide to your local congregation, oh my gosh, you all, that is what makes the ministry of the church happen. It's what makes the programs happen. It's what allows us to fulfill the calling that God has placed on our churches. And I got to tell you, for that makes my heart beat really fast, and I want to be a part of that. So that enabled me to say yes. A second anchor that I had as I was discerning if I could take this role is that I remembered that it is through our generosity that we are modeling the generosity of God, and that when we give back to God what God's already given to us, it honors God. And that got me really excited. And then finally, I recognize that all of us have a human bent to us, and that when we give to God or we give money to causes that we really care about, it's what makes us feel good. And so I started thinking, all right, to be a part of something that honors God, that makes mission and ministry possible, and helps people feel good, I'm all in for that. And so that is what fueled my passion to be a part. And so today I just want to share with you some of the things I've been learning as a newbie in this ministry, and I want to share with you some of those lessons. So let me get my screen going here. And all right, can you all see that?
Yep.
Is that a yes? Okay, good. So today I'm going to share with you some of the lessons that I have learned in my role here. And the first lesson that I have learned is that generosity is a beautiful and sacred act of discipleship. And so for those of us that have been a part of Resurrection, if you know anything about our church, one of the things that people consistently know about us or say about us is that we are relentlessly focused on our purpose. And here at Resurrection, that means every meeting that we have, every decision that we make about a program that we're going to start, when it comes to budgeting time, we are going to lay those decisions at the foot, if you will, of our purpose statement and ask, will this help us to fulfill that purpose statement? And our purpose statement here at Resurrection is to be used by God to build a Christian community where non-religious and nominally religious people are becoming deeply committed Christians. And so with that, we begin to say, okay, how are we going to fund the mission and ministry that's going to make that possible? And with that, we began looking at ways to ignite and inspire generosity. But we needed to know, well, what is a deeply committed Christian? And so with that, we identified 5 practices. They're the practices that you know. But those essential practices of a deeply committed Christian are, one, that they worship God, that we're growing in our faith apart from worship, reading of daily scripture, being a part of small groups, that we give in proportion to our income and through our time and our talents, our gifts and our treasure, our money, and that we're serving within the walls of the church and out, and that we are sharing our faith with others. And so the reason I am pointing this out when I think about generosity as being an act of discipleship, for us, it is a key component of what we do to help our congregants in their faith journey. It's essential to that. Pastor Adam Hamilton has written a book called The Walk, where he outlines these 5 essential practices. And in the book, his quote is this: God made us, or we are made for generosity. It is meant to be both the shape of our hearts and the way we live. Generosity, we're meant for it. And so as those leading in our congregations, whether you're the chair of the finance committee, trustees, or you're chairing your endowment foundation, you're a senior pastor of a local church, how are we helping our congregants in their discipleship pathway to live into this way that their hearts have been shaped in the ways that we live? Another anchor that I needed is I read a book called The Spirituality of Fundraising. Maybe you have read it. If you haven't, I want to highly encourage you to get it. It was actually the first book I read when I said yes to this role. It is by theologian Henry Nouwen. And in it, I underlined this quote, and I just say it over and over to myself every day, that this is what we get to do. That in this role, if we're saying that we're in the fundraising business, that it's a call to conversion. And this call comes to those who are seeking the funds, so that's us, and those who have the funds, that's us too. We're donors as well. And so whether or not we're the ones asking for the money, or we're the ones giving the money, we are doing something together by God, who's about to do a new thing for our collaboration. And so by being able to invite others into this active discipleship with their time, their skills, their financial resources, this I feel like is active disciple making in action. And that was a key learning for me. It wasn't just about the money, the check, funding a need, if you will. What really gets us passionate here at Resurrection, when we get the pleasure and the honor of meeting with our donors, is this call to active discipleship. Them knowing that the transformation of what they're going to do is not only going to change the life of somebody else, but it is going to be a part of the transformation of their own hearts and their own lives. And so within that, that's the lesson that I'm learning. This is an active discipleship. I also love that Joe Park, who has been a consultant with Resurrection. Many of you may already know him. He's the CEO of Horizons Consulting Company. Joe has said this to me several times, and if you know him, you've probably said it to you too. Friends, the church doesn't have a giving problem. We have an asking problem. And it's really amazing what you don't get when you don't ask. So we've really taken that to heart because our donors in their active discipleship want to be asked and they want to be a part of what God's doing. And if we don't ask them, we don't get. Now, here's another thing that I've learned and I've often heard, and I'm going to be honest, we get letters here every once in a while that say, you should never talk about money in the church. Anybody else heard that before? If you have, why don't you raise your hands? Let me hear you. See ya. Shouldn't talk about money in the church. Others say nobody wants to talk about money. People don't want to talk about money. Maybe you've heard that before too. And I'm just going to tell you that I've learned that that's actually not true. Because already today, I've talked to a friend of mine about the cost of coffee. I spoke to my grandbabies this morning that I'm watching about what a dollar can buy if we go out today and they're going to bring their dollars of what a dollar can buy. The reality is we're talking about money all the time. And the reality is the conversation isn't actually about the money. It's about what the money can do. And so why wouldn't we want to talk about it in our local churches and with our congregants when we begin to think about what the money can do to be a part of God's work? And so the lesson that I've learned is we should talk about money. And Jesus even modeled that for us. Luke 16, Jesus tells his disciples, hey, use your worldly wealth to make some friends, so that when everything else fails for them, they'll be welcomed into eternity. Matthew 6:24, Jesus says, no one can serve two masters, and you cannot serve both God and money. Luke 12:34, Jesus says that your treasure or the most important thing in your life will either be the goal of God's kingdom or money, but it can't be both. And of course, we know Jesus told parables about money. He told a parable about a sower, parable about a hidden treasure, the pearl. He's told parables about talents, the rich man, Lazarus. And so how can our donors know about the aspirations and expectations of generosity unless we teach them about it? And so at Resurrection, and I suppose at your local churches too, we do make it a priority to talk about money. We do that, of course, on a weekly basis through our weekly offering, where we're telling stories about the difference that it's making and inviting others to be a part of what God is doing. But we also commit a minimum of 3 weeks a year that are solely focused on generosity and stewardship, and inviting others to consider what they're going to commit in the upcoming year of using their resources here through an annual fund commitment. With that, through those sermon series, I just wanted to give you examples. You know, there are things like the legacy we leave. What did Jesus say about money? Investing for life. This year, we're going to be focusing on 3 important questions. Why Jesus? Why the church? And why resurrection? And the ways that we see our generosity and the ways that we steward it being played out within those 3 questions as being one of the most important things in life. So that will be this year's 3-week sermon series. And then after that, we do ask our donors to complete a commitment card. Now, this is not a math exercise for them. It is actually an act of worship, an act of discipleship, and it's prayerful. And all we ask them is take time, pray about what God's calling you to commit in this next year, write it down, and then faithfully bring it and lay it at the altar on commitment weekend. And so once a year, we invite everyone to bring those cards into worship and physically get out of their seats and bring them to the altar. I'm sure this is not unlike anything that you all are already doing too, but some churches have gone away from doing annual ministry fund campaigns and also gone away from having people fill out a commitment card. And I'm just going to show you very quickly the difference it makes for people to actually take the time to do those cards. Our data analytics have told us that a person who fills out a card, their average annual gift is almost 4%. It's 380% higher than our donors who actually are faithful givers, but they don't complete the commitment card. There's something spiritual, there's something sacred, there's something about that commitment that spurs and inspires those donors on to greater generosity. So if you're not using commitment cards right now, I might encourage you to reconsider them. Another stat you might actually be interested in, I just had them, so I thought I'd share them with you. For us, for our donors that are in worship more than one time a month, you may know that the average statistic for somebody to actually be in worship is one Sunday a month. That holds true here at Resurrection too. For our congregants who are actually in worship 2, 3, and 4 times a month, their gifts are close to 300% higher than those who only attend once a month. And if they are in worship more than once a month and they're in a small group, so that small group could be United Women of Faith, it could be another women's group, men's groups, their own little home-based small group, a Sunday school class. You guys look at that. Their annual gifts are nearly 500 times larger than the average. So engagement is really key. And again, that's what I have learned, is that generosity is an act of discipleship. And so I think about, what could I be doing any better than helping the stewards of God's resources become better stewards and invite them into this amazing transformative experience and invitation they have to be a part of God's work. And so when I think about that, my recap of my first lesson then is, we don't have a giving problem. We have an asking problem. And we would never think about not asking people to be on a discipleship journey, to be in worship, to be in a small group. So why wouldn't we ask them to be on a generosity journey as well? I've also learned that it's okay to talk about money in the church, because that is, we saw that modeled by Jesus. And I also love that I have learned that I'm not a fundraiser. Fundraisers raise money, but instead I'm a discipleship maker. And as that discipleship disciples stewards to be generous and to do good things with their resources to change the world. And that's what I'm excited about. Lesson number 2. Oops, sorry. Generosity is all about the donor. And so I say that because too often we begin to think about the needs of the church. So we'll start with an annual budget, we'll start with a fund a need, and we'll put the number up there, and then we have the thermometers that say what we need to raise in order to fund a need. But what I have learned here, and the reason that we've never been maybe at 100% on those goals, is because it's actually not inspiring to our donors. Instead, generosity is all about the donor. It's about their dreams, their passions, and what God is doing and welling up in their lives. And then it's about the needs of your church and of your foundation second. And what an incredible privilege we have as the leaders in the church to actually get to help steward those dreams. And so in order to be able to do that, I've learned that it's really important to develop strong, authentic, and just lasting relationships with our donors. So it means that we spend a considerable amount of time just getting to know people, having coffees, listening to stories, and really learning how it is that they want their resources to be deployed in something that's really meaningful and something that's beneficial to them. and not starting with that, hey, here's what the church needs, or here's what the foundation needs. Can you help us fund that? It's asking them, Mrs. Jones, tell me your story. I'd love to know your generosity story, or I'd love to know what brought you here. I'd like to know what you're most excited about and what you love about our church. Tell me what you love about this community that we live in. And then in all of those, my favorite question that I always ask is at the end is, Mrs. Jones, oh my gosh, I just love hearing where you were raised. I love hearing about your family. And as you think about all that, what is the impact that you want your generosity to have? And it's in that I am learning what fuels their passions so that I can match that up when a need comes. And so it's about remembering. We have an incredible donor that I met a couple of years ago, and she, when I sat down just over a cup of coffee with her, I learned that when she and her husband lived in New York City, one of the things that she would do is volunteer and go down onto the streets and feed the homeless. Now, her husband did not like her doing this. And as her children were grown and she was still doing it, her grown children also did not like her going out to do that. But she shared with me with such compassion, but also joy of what she experienced while she was doing that on the streets of New York. So when she came here, I remembered that, and I called her one day and got her hooked up so that she went out with our team to serve the homeless. That resulted in her going back to her apartment complex. She gathered about 35 of the people that lived in her apartment complex. And to this day, once a month, they pack sack lunches that then go out to our food trucks and they're delivered to those that are on the streets. If you were to see her and to see the smile that brings to her 89-year-old face, it is unbelievable. This year, her children who live out of state, one in Florida and one in Montana, they were here over the summer, and we took them out so that they could see what their mom was doing. And as a result of that now, of course, this is in their planned gift. So not only are they being generous in their living, but through their planned giving. But that all came from getting to know her, remembering her story, and when there was a need, being able to match it up. So lesson 2, I've learned that it is about the donors. And I got to tell you, I've also, in order to do that, I've drank a lot of coffee, which I enjoy, and I've eaten a lot of cookies. And to be honest with you, and I'm not exaggerating, gained 5 pounds in my 5 years since I've started this. But the conversations that I've had are just unbelievably rich, and they're really lovely. And so as I shared it when I first started, that anchor point that I needed, giving money to causes that people feel really good about makes them feel good, and it causes and inspires more generosity. And so we can see why in Acts 20:35, Jesus was quoted as saying, "It is more blessed to give than to receive," which takes me to lesson 3. Lesson 3, I have learned that donors are not motivated by numbers, and they are not motivated by budgets. This has just been something that we really had to think about here at Resurrection, as we have been that church that lays the budget in front of our congregants. We say, this is what the need is, this is what it's going to cost. And we will get a good response. But when we can shift it and begin to tell the stories of what that budget is going to produce and why it matters, that's when people really connect. And so, for example, instead of talking about what our annual fund now does, again, with that, they're not motivated by what the budget will produce, they're motivated by why it matters. And we look at those stats. So we gave out 300 or some 3rd grade Bibles last year. That's a lot of Bibles. Again, I told you we have 8 locations. And so that's a nice number, and people will hear that number. They're going to hear about the number of people that were in recovery this past year, or the number of participants in our special needs program. Those are just numbers. But instead, when we get to tell the stories about George, who got his 3rd grade Bible this year, and as he got it, he read his required New Testament book of Mark. And after reading it, came and declared to Pastor Joshua, I am going to be a pastor someday. And so how incredible. I want to, have the opportunity to thank our donors for their generosity. Because of their giving to that annual fund, we are able to give Bibles to 3rd graders. And when they open it up, they discover God's word. And for some, like George, they've already heard a calling as an 8-year-old that they are going to be a pastor someday. I told you that, we can share the number of how many people are in our recovery ministry, but it's when you hear the story of Jeff Lady that you realize its impact. Jeff was a teacher. He was very respected in the community. And Jeff, being an addict, made a very poor decision as a teacher. He lost his job. He lost his reputation, and he spent about 4 years in prison. Jeff was recently released from prison. He totally dejected, thought he had no self-worth anymore. He found his way to resurrection on that first weekend that he was out, came here, started in our recovery. And Jeff says, because of you, Resurrection, and because you make this program available, I know now that I am loved by God and that I matter. That's what generosity produces. And then finally, Matthew's Ministries. Our day program that we have here is for adults that have aged out of any other services that might be available to them. So they come here. And this is Elliot. Elliot and his brother went from church to church and did not find any churches that really had services for them or chose to have services for them here in the Kansas City area. And so they ended up here. And I love what Elliot said. Because of your generosity, I feel at home here. This is my forever home. And so it's sharing those kind of stories. That's what motivates our donors more. It's not the stats, it's the stories. What are some other things you can do? Is just that one-time giving. Right now, we have a lot of donors who are making gifts to disaster response. And so we will follow up with them and let them know what a difference those gifts are going to make right now as we send those funds down for those that have been impacted by Helene and now Milton. Community needs that arise, food drives, back to school drives, blood drives, helping with Vacation Bible Camp, Christmas Eve offering. This was one where we invited our donors to purchase solar light kits for villages in Malawi. And I love showing that back in here are homes that are dark. And as we've been continuing to get these solar light kits, you can see a community that now has light. It's not about how many solar light kits were given. We always start with the number, don't we? And we'll say, we sent down 100 solar light kits. Oh my gosh, it's so much different of a story that inspires me when I get to see and I get to say, you took a community that was dark, and because of your generosity, now has light. So there is power in that. In real time, I thought you might enjoy this. Yesterday, our team met to brainstorm for our upcoming stewardship campaign, which starts November 10th. And so again, just remembering that our donors are not motivated by those budgets. And so we sat down and we said, okay, well, what does the budget produce? And then what's the impact behind it? And this is our huge brainstorming list. And this is fresh off the press from yesterday. I know you probably can't see it, but we talked about how many confirmands. So we can say, this is the number of confirmands, or we can say, hey, this is how many students made faith their own this year. You made that possible. Sunday school classes. This is how many classes we have. We could put that number out there, but it's meaningless until we get to say that number took a deeper dive into scripture this year, some for the first time. And so you can see how this works. I thought you might find that somewhat interesting. Coming up on lesson 4. I have learned that follow-up and gratitude must be a priority. And so with us, we make it a priority to send, whoops, sorry, I'm throwing stuff everywhere around here, to build that kind of trust by making certain that we send thank you notes, make personal phone calls, and then keep our donors informed of the impact of what is happening with the gift that we have received. And so with that, some of our practices include that we do a first time gift thank you note. So of course they'll get the perfunctory acknowledgement that's required for our fiduciary responsibilities, that we received the gift and we acknowledge no goods or services were exchanged for it. But then they're also going to get a thank you note that's personal to us. We actually email those now, and that was a shift. We really believe that handwritten notes were a surprise and delight. And so we spent hours writing those first-time donor notes. But then we never heard back from those donors. They would get that in the mail. We assumed that they liked receiving them, but we did a test and we shifted to where we emailed donors within the first week of receiving that gift. Oops, sorry. And in that, we hear back from many of them. They will tell us why they made the gift. They'll just say, oh my gosh, thank you for letting me know with that. And then also, of course, in those thank you emails, we're giving them a personal contact to come have coffee, meet with one of us, or an invitation to a next step of something that's happening in the life of the church that they would consider. We also are careful to not say thank you for your first gift, because it might not be their first gift. They may have put in some cash and another time that was anonymous. And so we'll just say thank you for their recent gift. And with that, again, this year we received a note from a woman brand new to our community, made her first gift here. So we sent her our email, personalized it to her, and her response back to us was that in all of her years of going to churches, this was the first time she had ever been thanked personally, besides that perfunctory letter, for a gift. And so again, I'm going to go back. What's the lesson I've learned is how important follow-up promptly and timely is, and that gratitude must be our priority. Another thing that we do is we will make these personal. So Walgreens and CVS have become our best friends. We can print greeting cards there for about $1. You'll find coupons all the time. We spend about $1.50 on these with coupons. And so what you can see on here, these are pictures of a handbell choir here at Resurrection. And then our Matthews Ministries, our Sunflower Bakers, our adult learners who come in, they bake all the baked goods for our church. And so the pictures are on here because this is what that donor contributed to. So we take pictures along the way, and then we will send them a personalized card that we create in seconds, just using that photo card maker at Walgreens to thank them for their gifts. The person who received this was actually a memorial gift for her mother, who was a part of the Kansas City community. The person who received it, as you see over here on the left, posted on social media that she had received this card. So this is her actual post that she posts about receiving it. And then she invites everybody to come to our church to hear the sunflower ringers using the bells that this memorial gift was able to purchase. And here's what's interesting, friends. The daughter, this Rochelle Morse Hill, is not from Kansas City. She lives in Colorado. So she gets a letter that's personalized to her. Sorry. She then she puts it out on social media, and then she invites her friends in Kansas City, people who may have known her mom, to come to an event here. That spurs on generosity, that shares stories, and it helps our donors know that we are using their resources in the way that they intended. Here's an example of a card that we use. We do not email young adults, so anybody under the age of 22, we don't email them. We handwrite them notes. And so if a child puts in $5 and we know the child's name, or a 13-year-old or a 19-year-old, we handwrite them a note, and we've customized this card a little bit to have it look a little bit more youthful. So that's just another example of some of the things that we do to make it personal. We also box up. This is a small little box. It's got 6 cookies in it. It's a diminuous gift, but it is something that donors remember. So anytime I know a donor is coming in to meet with me, we've had several meetings already in the office today. We have these boxed up and we hand them this as they're leaving. And again, it's a nothing gift. These cookies cost 75 cents, but those donors remember it and they're taking it home, and it feels like a gift of luck to them. Other things that we do, of course, we give coffee mugs to all of our donors who make commitments. New members will receive a CEB study Bible because, again, this is an act of discipleship, and for many, this is their first opportunity to have a study Bible in their hands. So we make those gifts available to them. But we also give out quarterly statements that help our donors see how their giving is progressing. We tell stories in the offering. We post on social media, and through Adam's communication, he will share what's going on. And so in that lesson, again, just a reminder that lesson 4 is follow-up must be timely. We have donors who say they've never heard from a church before, besides the perfunctory, but not in a personal way. And then 2, that gratitude must be a priority. And then I have learned that today I'm going to take a little bit of liberty, because I said it was going to be 5 lessons. And so I have a lesson 5A and a lesson 5B. Here's my 5A lesson for you. It's important that we don't make generalizations about our donors. We need to be curious. And so we have been spending a lot of time realizing that even here at Resurrection, and maybe you are like us, we make generalizations about our donors. And so, for instance, we begin saying, what assumptions do we make about donors? Does our data actually support those assumptions? And once we find out the real data, what are we going to do with that? And so what are some of those assumptions? 1, here at Resurrection, we have a belief that our older congregants are giving more than our younger congregants. That was an assumption. That's what we say. And we all of a sudden said, let's just take a look and see if it's true or not. Secondly, that our younger generation, so our millennials and Gen Zs, hey, they're not giving at all. So that was an assumption that we had. So we took those 2 assumptions and we put them into our data. And this is what we began to find out. So what does the data tell us? First, we went to Giving USA. I'm sure you're familiar with this report. And from it, we learned that they surveyed 1,400 donors across all the generations to get these results. And according to their results, here is what they found. The millennials are actually more generous, right, than the Gen Xers. So that's the generation before them. And the assumption held out that they are less generous than the boomers. So you can see the shifts there. All right, but here is the important thing to notice. I want you to look at the increase. Millennials from 2016 to 2022 actually increased their generosity by 40%. The generation right before them decreased, and the boomers, the generation that I'm in, and I'm going to guess most of you are in, I can't see you, have decreased our generosity. So that was kind of an aha moment for us to say, they are generous, they are givers. And while they are not giving at the same amount as the boomers, we're seeing a huge opportunity for them to give more. But the assumption did hold that this generation is not giving to the church. So we are not seeing it in the church. Millennials are less likely to give to a church. Instead, you will see that their biggest generosity goes to faith-based organizations. All right, so they are giving to Catholic Charities and Habitat for Humanity, Salvation Army, places like that. So that is where the biggest proportion of their giving goes, is to faith-based organizations. Now, interesting, boomers, do give to places of worship, but that is on the decrease from 2016 to 2022. And instead, you can see what's increased for boomers is education, giving to their local school, well, not their local schools, but to their colleges, their universities, and then giving to other faith-based organizations. Here is the thing that I've learned. Those organizations have amazing trained fundraisers, and they're asking. And sometimes in the church, we're not asking enough. And so our donors don't know what the impact of their gifts can be, so we can do a better job. The question, though, that was then asked is, hey, would you consider maybe increasing your giving to a place of worship? And what was the result? Our Gen Z and our millennials said, hey, I would consider doing that. So again, we're seeing that there is opportunity there. And so we laid that over the top of Resurrection's actual giving to see how it played out here. And what we found is that every person that we have data on and their age brackets, if they are the silent generation, so these two up here, close to 90% of them have made a gift to Resurrection. Our boomers, 92%. Gen X, that generation that was born between 65 and 80, have given, made 86% of them we have information on have made a gift to Resurrection. But look what happens to the millennials. The millennials born in 1981 to 96 here at Resurrection, only 44% of them have made a gift to Resurrection. The Gen Zs, now starting to be in the workplace. They were born 1997 to 2010. Only 13% have given to Resurrection. So I'm being vulnerable enough to share these stats with you to say now we actually have real data versus our own assumptions to back up what we thought was to be true here. And then we asked another question. Well, are the millennials less generous at Resurrection than their predecessors? So we said in 1994 and 1999, that's the first year we have data we could go back to. Gen Xers, the one right before them, when they were age 34, their average gift was $937. In 2015, millennials turned 34, and their average gift was $1,337. So they actually gave more. Now, you may be asking the question that I asked, is that inflation adjusted? And it is not, so I put it into the calculator. And again, another data point, they actually trend about $500 less. So they don't give as much yet, but they have said, yeah, I have propensity. I might consider giving more to the church. And so for us, we are changing our strategies this year of how we're going to communicate. We've asked millennials how they prefer communication. And what we've learned from them is they actually do like mail, but they don't want to open an envelope. So we're going to be communicating to them about our annual campaign through a QR code that links them to their commitment card but it's on a postcard that doesn't have to be opened. They'll get text messages from us, and they will also get emails from us. So it's helping us shape new strategies instead of doing the same thing over and over and over, which would have resulted in us losing this generation. And so with that, I want to encourage you on my learning of 5A of not making generalizations, to use actual data. And that helps you have common language for everybody that's in decision-making roles, from your finance committee to your trustees to your board. It helps break down silos and competition amongst generations or ministries. It increases collaboration amongst your teams. It fuels our curiosity. And now it's helping us drive cost savings, because we know now our millennials do not want us to mail something in an envelope they have to open. They'll open it maybe eventually, but it'll sit in a pile for a couple of weeks before they actually tear the envelope open. So encourage you to do that and to be curious. All right. And so here's a few questions to help you be curious. When you go back to your church or your organization, what might you be assuming about your donors? Just make a list. We have a whole bunch of other questions. Those were just the first two that we started with. How can you get data then that will inform your findings about those actual assumptions? And then what do you want to know about those donors? And so we held little forms where we were asking questions for that. Which brings me up to my final learning, which is 5B. The generosity of the congregation or whatever organization you're leading is going to be modeled by you. And so I want to encourage you, as you're thinking about where your church is at in its giving, then I begin to have to look at myself inward. And I know that it's my responsibility, and as a donor here at Resurrection, that I need to be faithful in my tithing. I need to also be transparent about where I'm struggling and what I'm thinking about, and then being able to share with our donors the steps that I'm taking so that I can become more generous. And then I have the incredible privilege of being able to celebrate all that God is doing in my life as I learn to be more generous. And I know that our donors need to hear more about what God is doing. And so with that, here's just a quick recap of my learnings. Generosity is an act of discipleship. It's all about the donor. It's not motivated by budgets or by numbers, but instead by the impact of what that generosity will produce. Follow-up and gratitude must be a priority. It's important to not make generalizations, but instead use data to inform whatever decisions you make. And then finally, it is the congregation will follow your lead. I began to think about how important the work of what we get to do is and how amazing it is. And I'm just going to be honest with you and tell you, I'm a really terrible fundraiser. But I love Jesus, and I love what the local church can do. And I love that I get to be a part of this incredible invitation that God's given to us and to you to put our houses in order and help our donors be a part of God's transforming work in the world to make disciples of Jesus Christ. So I want to thank you guys that you invited me to come in and be a part of your group. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Debbie. Are there any questions before we let Debbie go? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Debbie. We appreciate your
Thank you
time.
guys. Have a good day.